Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Mystic Chat. I am Chris Allen, and very excited about today's show. Partly it's because it's with just some of my favorite um, um, people in the whole world. But plus, we're going to talk about Day of the Dead and ghosts and holiness and sacredness and the dead, and should I say the dead, and some word dead and maybe some other things. Anyway, let me introduce myself again. I am Chris Allen. I'm an ordained clergyman with the Fellowship of the Phoenix. I am also a published author, and my co-host Frater Aaron. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, this is Frater Aaron. I'm a magician in an armchair, a mentor of the Fellowship of the Phoenix, and a practicing traditional witch and ceremonial magician. And I am super happy to introduce our third co-host and our main speaker for today's chat, Laura Gonzalez.
Woohoo!
Hello. Hi, my name is Laura Gonzalez. I'm a feminist witch. I'm a priestess, a minister, communicator, educator, podcaster, and a witch for hire. Pew, pew. And I'm an aficionado of Day of the Dead. No, I'm not an aficionado. I am very extremely passionate and I dare say knowledgeable about Day of the Dead. And it is my pleasure to be here today after a long time of absence. I haven't been here in a long time, and thank you for having me back and not giving me the boot.
Get out of here.
I know.
So tell us about the Day of the Dead, what it is, and importantly what it isn't.
Okay, let's start for what it isn't. It is not Mexican Halloween. Let me repeat that. It is not Mexican Halloween. It has nothing to do with Halloween. It has nothing to do with the secular celebration of the witches and the ghouls and the pumpkins and all that. And that is what it's not. What it is an amalgamation of cultures, and it is pretty much a very unique way of honoring the dead and celebrating our ancestors. And when I say an amalgamation is because contrary to popular misconception that it is a Catholic holiday, it's not. It has its roots in, it is believed, some scholars say 2,000, some scholars say 3,000 years on what is now modern Mexico City, mostly what is Mexico City, but throughout the whole continental Mexico. And it has its roots on ancient indigenous holidays that were harvesting holidays. They were celebrated at the end of rain season and harvesting season, which is early to mid-August and September. And there were 2 months of 20 days that were celebrated, first for the flower and then for the fruit. And that is very important because, when the celebration of the time of the flowers happened, it was also the celebration of those who die young, or they die as flowers, or in the flowering time frame of their life. And then the second 20-day month celebration was for the fruit, the falling of the fruit or the harvesting. And it was also celebrated for those who die as a fruit, either a fruit that just ripened and fell off the tree, or whether an elderly fruit that was ready to give its seed back to the earth. And our ancestors, the Mexica people, known as Aztecs, which is not the correct name, is Mexica people, utilize those metaphors and the mysticism to speak about life and life cycles. And it's basically a holiday that honors life. And again, the metaphor of the life cycle, you know, you're a seed, then you're a seedling, then you're a plant, then you're a flower, then you're a tree or whatever, and then you become fruit, and then you go back to be a seed, and so on and so forth. So it talks about the regeneration of life. And that's what the ancestors, the indigenous ancestors, celebrate, not homogeneously on throughout all of Mexico, right? Mexico is a huge continental country, and there were many different pueblos and tribes, and each peoples will celebrate slightly different, but that's kind of the gist of it. And then when the colonizers came and they pillaged and robbed and everything, all the disgusting things they did, they brought their Catholic religion with them. And I'm going to say my joke, which you can laugh at the joke right now. You can laugh. And if you're Mexican, you can repeat the joke. If you're not Mexican, please do not say this joke, but please laugh. Mexico is the most pagan country in the world. Don't tell the Mexicans, they think they're Catholic. And haha, the joke is the Catholicism that came to Mexico was heavily infused with Indo-European pagan traditions. So by the time the Catholicism came to Mexico, it already had co-opted Samhain into All Saints Day and All Souls Day. So when they came to Mexico and they started telling the Mexican people, you cannot celebrate your holidays, Tlaxochimeaco and Xocohuetzin, you have to celebrate All Saints Day and All Souls Day. All Saints Day and All Souls Day, it was more celebrated like Samhain than whatever that was before the commodification of the Druid holiday. So they bring elements, and I mean literally the elements, into the aspect of Day of the Dead. So you have to have the papel picado, the colorful paper decoration that look kind of like my shawl, to represent air, and then water for purification, and then fire for purification, and then earth. And with earth, it got combined with the flower and the fruit and the food. So now you have all these elements that are pagan in origin, but dressed as Catholicism, intertwining with ancient indigenous traditions. And they got married, had a baby, and the baby is called Day of the Dead. And Day of the Dead is celebrated as it is celebrated now. It has been for about 100 to 150 years. And now it goes beyond, because now we have people of the diaspora like myself who are bringing the traditions elsewhere, not only in Mexico, but outside of Mexico. And it's taking its own flavor and different representation, like everything that moves with the diaspora. And now we have a very heavy influx of people that are celebrating it here in the United States, Mexicans and Mexican Americans, but they are doing it on different flavor. You know, we don't do holidays, we don't do parades, we don't dress as sugar skulls. That is very, very new. There is now a parade that happens in Mexico, but it's very new in Mexico City. I think it started in 2018. And that is, in a nutshell, my 3-hour presentation reduced to 10 minutes.
So I'm curious. So, you know, you were saying there's a little bit of a difference about how it's celebrated in Mexico and how it's celebrated here. I guess is it a two-part question? What are the differences? And is it like when it's here, does each city celebrate it differently, or is it kind of like a Mexican tradition instead of an American tradition?
I think the main difference is in Mexico, people really concentrate on celebrating the dead. So people go to the cemeteries, people go clean the tombs and the graveyards, people go beautify those spaces, they will bring flowers, they will bring candles, they will do prayers, they will go do like the Catholic novenas and stuff like that. They will bring the offering, the ofrenda, they will bring that to the cemetery, especially like in small towns of Mexico. In Mexico City, that happens mostly at the cemeteries, and people go back home and then they put the ofrenda home. And it's more of a, it has more of a religious and solemn aspect to it. Though, again, modern day, younger people, that you have a party and it's taken more into a little bit of this Halloween flavor in Mexico because the trading of traditions is inevitable. People move and traditions move with the people. So there are people who were here in the United States and then went back to Mexico, and now they have like a Halloween, Day of the Dead amalgamation thing, which older Mexicans like myself, we scream about it like, oh my God, don't do that. But, people are going to do what they do. But the most rich tradition happens at the cemeteries, and it happens in like smaller towns of Mexico. And like I say, it's more solemn, but people also celebrate. In Mexico, we usually don't paint ourselves as sugar skulls, and we don't parade. Like I say, there is a time and a day for a parade, and that is very, very new. But people painting themselves as sugar skulls is not something that happens in Mexico a lot. And then in the United States, is the opposite. You have your older generation Mexicans and some Mexican Americans that will go to the cemeteries, will bring decorations and do that. But because cemeteries are different here, people cannot stay overnight. People cannot put a lot of adornments in the tombs and the graves. And whenever they do, it gets taken down because, the cemetery police are very strict and all of that. And then you have younger Mexican Americans, mostly Mexican Americans, who do the whole, let us paint our faces, let us have a party. And yes, they have an altar and they have this remembrance of the ancestors, but it takes more on a party flavor, which is a party, but it's not Halloween. And to my dismay, I've seen this year a lot of people on TikTok going to Halloween parties, Mexican American kids dressed as sugar skulls, and you can win. It is their culture because we are Mexican American, but they don't see how that opened the door to cultural appropriation. Because I think us, the immigrants, are more protective of the tradition. I think us Mexican immigrants are more protective of the tradition because that's all we have left. And Mexican Americans are more loose with it because they don't feel that it will get lost.
So that's an interesting way to, I'm glad you said it like that, because I was thinking when you were talking about it, because, cultures change and traditions change and blah, blah, blah. And, one of the things I talk about appropriation is, when you take Catholicism to Mexico, that is an appropriation. When white people take Day of the Dead from Mexico, that's appropriation, because of, of white people are not an oppressed culture. Mexican people, especially in this country, they are. Aaron, what questions did you have?
I decline.
You decline. So
Okay,
that's so
well,
funny.
Eric,
As I mean, especially as an American-born Mexican American, I'm gonna skip this part.
what I read what B posted on the chat, and she said, families often eat meals at relatives' graves. Yes, absolutely. There is that tradition, and unlike Coco the movie, you don't need a photograph exclusively. It's cute and it's nice that we have photographs now. But food is front and center of the celebration because we're Mexicans and we're always eating. And we're always having parties. So again, it's a solemn celebration, it's religious, but it's still a party. So you bring the food to the cemetery and drinks, of course, spirits. See what I did there? And you drink your spirits and you do your thing. And one of the cool parts that I really like about this is when you do the ofrenda at home and you put the food, you don't eat it on Day of the Dead, you eat it the next day. And it is believed that when you eat it the next day, it has taken off all the nutritional value because the dead took that.
Right.
So you'll eat it, but it doesn't have nutritional value anymore. And Aaron, you being a Mexican American, I really want to hear your questions.
Well, I don't have a question right now. It's okay,
Okay.
but I'm sure I will. And you
So-
addressed the one. I know I've brought up photographs in the past just because like the PBS Latina Voices, there was a few people talking about how photographs were so hard, were so required to be a traditional mesa, but that might not. One, how far back could you really take that tradition, realistically speaking? And then two, of course we're not going to have photographs of all the family members.
Yeah. Another thing that is not traditional, and I really have to address it because Coco. So Coco is a two-edged sword. The movie was very well done. I really appreciate what they did. But they had some things wrong. And one of the things that they had wrong was the photograph thing. The other thing that they have very, very wrong is the alebrijes. Alebrijes have absolutely nothing to do with Day of the Dead. Zero.
What is that? Explain
The
that to us.
alebrijes, the figurines, the fantastic figurines that fly and they're very colorful.
Oh yeah.
So I do have an alebrije. So somebody speaks so the camera gets off me so I can go get it.
Sure. So Carlos mentioned in the chat, in Mexico, Dia de Muertos has become more of an American style party where an overwhelming number of people dress like Jack Skellington and his girlfriend. I think generationally, the older people, those of us that remember how we celebrated our ancestors, are the ones that safeguard what used to be, not what it has become. It is sad. I have friends from Guanajuato who talked about that as well, how when they were growing up, Dia de Muertos was one thing. And now, even less because of travel and immigration, but media.
Yep.
Halloween is gaining a lot of popularity with the kids, and of course they want candy. So trick or treat has become a thing. Parades has become a thing. And funny enough, I just heard recently, because I've been in the Halloween spirit, how this has been happening in like England and Ireland and stuff too. So of course they had Samhain, but they didn't have American Halloween until maybe a decade ago or however long ago. But Halloween is going to Japan, it's going to England and Europe, and it's going to Mexico.
Yep.
And listening to Laura talk about Dia de Muertos spreading, it's funny, it's like it's going to be more everywhere else,
Yep.
And then while Halloween keeps increasing in Mexico.
Yeah. The thing with the United States Halloween, I grew up with Halloween from the United States. I'm from Mexico City, so we get a lot of exchange very quickly. So I'm 50 years old, well, I'm 49 and a half. And I grew up with, there's gonna be a Halloween party, and it usually happened the weekend before Day of the Dead. So, but it was very well delimited. Like, there's gonna be a Halloween party, we all gonna dress up, blah blah. Oh, within a couple of days, we're going to the cemetery, we're gonna do Day of the Dead, you know? So it was very well separated. And of course, disclaimer, the Mexico that I left 25 years ago doesn't exist anymore, you know?
Right.
Now it's 25 years in the future, and I don't know how much of the customs and traditions have evolved. I get obviously information from resources and friends, but it is more of an amalgamation. However, as much as we can get nervous, like Carlos was mentioning, like I think the majority of people safeguard the tradition, you know. And yet you talk to scholars who speak more from an indigenous point of view, and they look at the Katrina, you know, the fancy lady with the hat, that has nothing to do with Day of the Dead from 300 years ago. And those scholars are like, well, Katrina has nothing to do with Day of the Dead. So how many things are we going to actually incorporate into it? How many we are not? I'm very egotistical, but I'm not speaking from ego here. I've been asked a number of times to write a book about Day of the Dead, and I'm like, why would I? It keeps changing, and it keeps changing, and it keeps evolving, and it keeps being different things. And now we have Mexican children wanting to put alebrijes into the ofrenda because of Coco. So I made this alebrije, so it's not perfect and it's not the traditional way. But alebrijes are this type of artisanal things. And they usually have like a lot of little dots like this. And usually they will be made of different animals. So it will have the head of a tiger and wings and maybe claws from an eagle and the tail of a serpent and something else. So they're very fantastical animals. And they were created on the 1930s, I think, out of a artist that had a nightmare, you know, and it was visited by these animals. And there is the belief in Mexico that people are born with a bigger quotes spirit animal. I'm not speaking like on the Native American north of the Americas spirit animal, but more like a guiding essence or a guiding totemic presence of the animal. And what Coco did is they took that idea of a totemic companion animal and materialized it into the alebrijes. So alebrijes are very colorful and they're beautiful and they're, you know, wonderful, but they have nothing to do with Day of the Dead. However, now kids in Mexico are like, oh, can I dress like the Charlotte dog? I can't remember the name on the movie, you know, they want to dress like the doggy because, you know, it's the alebrije and it's the spirit of the dead. And it's like, it has nothing to do with it. So where is this tradition going? I think it's going everywhere. I really do think that it's going throughout the world. So let me bring my soapbox. People in the United States love our aesthetics. They love the color, they love the food, they love the offerings, they love the traditions. By golly, they love our neighborhoods and they love everything that we have to offer. They just don't love us. So that is a huge problem. If you want to partake into the tradition, if you want to really be part of it, by the love of God, buy things from Mexican artisans. If you don't have a Mexican artisan near you, shake a tree, one of them will fall. If you don't have a tree near you, I'm sure you have a designated Mexican that can point you into the direction of Mexican artisans. Buy from small businesses. Colorful, beautiful, and authentic. Big box stores are capitalizing into Day of the Dead. Big box stores do not need your money. But Juanita and Xochitl and Maria and Carlos need your money. So buy from the small artisans, and I leave my soapbox now.
We went to pick up some medications at CVS the other night. Well, in August the other night. And the whole store was covered in papeles. And we walked in and I go, what's going on in here? Like, what, like I didn't know if there was a party or what, but I think they were just getting ready because a month later they started selling all, you know, the ceramic skulls and decorations. But yeah, they had them strung up through the ceiling, through the whole store. Now, do you think it's appropriate that that people who are interested in this type of holiday look to their own um, their own heritages and see what type of ancestor remembrance and holidays they had near them? So, like the Hungry Ghost Day in China, and I've actually believe there's 2 day of cemetery visits in Asia throughout the year, and there is in Spain as well, and I, you know, we've talked about Samhain, and I'm sure everywhere else. How do you think Dia de Muertos can inspire people to look into their own traditions?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think exactly by that, you know, I was very fortunate that somebody asked me, you know, and I'm no hate to that person. I actually, I'm happy that they reach out and ask. So they asked me, paraphrasing here, you know, my son watched the movie Coco. He was very happy that he is going to get to see his dog later. Can we celebrate Day of the Dead? So A for effort, right? But I'm like, so you want to celebrate Day of the Dead because your dog died and you're watching a movie? That's not the reason to do it, in my opinion, which is what they asked. So what I recommend to them is like, hey, why don't you check on your own lineage, right? What is your background? Anybody that is not Native American is an immigrant. So check on your lineage of immigration background, whether you come from Europe, from Asia, from Southeast Asia, or whatever. What do your people do? And I promise you there's going to be a death celebration because the whole humanity has observed these celebrations. To which they reply, they don't have, for whatever circumstances that I'm not knowledgeable of, they didn't have blood lineage to trace. And I just told them, you know, I feel very sorry. I'm sorry that you don't have a blood lineage to trace. Educate yourself, you know, but don't do Day of the Dead just because you watched the movie Coco and the family dog died. And again, I give this person A for effort, you know, they ask and they were conscious. And let me clarify, I don't speak for every Mexican that ever existed. I'm just Laura, and you can take or leave my opinion, but I really do encourage people to research and to find out and to connect with whatever comes from your heritage and your background. I have a friend, oh my God, I can't remember her name, who is a very, very strong advocate of Nordic traditions and culture, and she brings all of that to the United States. And she and I were having this kind of conversation many, many years ago that a lot of people in the United States have become very comfortable with the idea of, well, we are Americans, and by saying America, they erase the whole continent and take the name just for themselves. But the concept, you know, we are Americans and this is our culture. And I'm like, which part, you know? I think it just is kind of, oh my God, people are going to hate me. I just think it's lazy.
I agree with you 100%.
And if you look under every rock and cannot find any tradition that belongs to your family or your ancestry, and you really, 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 really must celebrate Day of the Dead because there's absolutely nothing left, buy from Mexican artisans, go to the Mexican exhibitions, go to the Mexican museum, go to the Mexican parties and celebrations, and do not dress as a sugar skull unless you're invited to dress as a sugar skull. But if you really must, I've always said it, the difference between appropriation and appreciation is education. Educate yourself.
So we've been talking about mainstream holidays and practices. What would be a deeper way of looking into these traditions in a magical context
Oh my
and
goodness.
working with the dead?
You got me right on my curandera healing feelings. I believe that the connection that we have with the spirit, with the ancestors on Day of the Dead is very magical and cathartic. Death and the process of death, dying, burial, and all of that in the United States is very sanitized, is very clean. People get pumped with formaldehyde and tucked in a box and then put on the earth to pollute forever. And if you cry at the visitation, everybody looks at you like, what's wrong with that person? Somebody died. That's what's wrong with a person. You know, they miss their loved one. Like, why wouldn't they cry? So from a curandera point of view, I think we Mexicans are unique because we see death as a happenstance of life. You know, we cry, we have snot all over our faces, we don't sleep, we want to hug the casket, and a lot of people get super drunk and start talking crap about the dead, and then you have the the lover that nobody knew existed coming into the wake, and there's a big mess and like a big novela. I mean, it's real life. It's part of life. So when the person died, that happens, right? And we don't sanitize none of it. As a matter of fact, there is a tradition, or when I was growing up, there was a tradition to hire women, particularly women. I don't know if men ever did it. And these people were hired to go to the visitation to wail and cry. And because these women, well-paid actors to wail and cry, they get the people going. And so everybody will be wailing and crying, and you know, you will feel the visceral pain of losing a person. And then you go and bury them, and that's it, right? And then the next day of the day rolls in, and they come. And they come, and you can tell me I cannot believe anything more than I believe that the dead come that day, and they visit. And that from all kinds of species, especially the family doggies visit me because they know I love doggies. But also family and friends, you know, they come and visit. And in my opinion, it's a very healthy way of mourning, of understanding loss, and to keeping them alive. Because you talk about them, you tell the stories about their life, you make their food, and you tell the young ones, this is what they liked. And I hope that when I die, people talk about how much I love Diet Coke until I got super sick and I started drinking water, and, you know, all those kinds of stories that keep the dead alive. And we commune with them. We talk to them. I mean, I think it's a great way to ask questions and to ask for advice and to give gratitude as well, you know. And then the season ends, right? Because like Samhain is not just 2 days, you know. Modern celebration starts like on the 27th, and then it ends on the 5th or 6th, and then off they go, and you know you're going to be okay. The next 300 days, 360 days, you're going to be okay because they're coming back next year. I think, to me, that is the most precious part of Day of the Dead, you know, to know that they come, that we partake with them, and that they go. And I think it's a very deep work on reflection into our mortality, to know that eventually we all gonna, I mean, there's one thing for sure in life, is that we're gonna die. So it helps you reflect on your own mortality, and it helps you it gives you permission to mourn
Mm.
consciously and to go into that place of deep sorrow and deep loss. And you give yourself permission to suffer and cry, but at the same time, it's a huge celebration of their lives and all of the challenges that they went through so that we can be here, you know? So, I mean, I think it's, I don't know, I'm getting emotional now. I think it's a fantastic spiritual experience.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, in our culture, just like you said, we don't cry and we're not supposed to grieve. And people say, oh, well, you know, get over it and stuff like that. Or after a couple years, when they say, oh, why can't you just move on? And counseling, there's no such thing as really moving on because they affected your life. The thing I tell all my students and things like that is that when you're grieving, you over time you begin to incorporate that grief into your energy, into your aura. So you don't necessarily think of about the grief all the time, but when you take a few breaths and quiet yourself, the grief is still there. You know, you just learn to live with it. And you know, just like what you're saying, it's very important to feel the ancestors and be with them, and it's a very sacred, magical, healing time, you know. And you know, going back to those people who are like, oh, I don't have a lineage, I'm like, you can celebrate Samhain. Every pagan does. Well, not every
Also,
pagan,
All
but
Souls Day.
exactly. There's so many things, and who says you can't come up with your own uh, way of honoring the ancestors? And for myself, I honor them every single day. I have an ancestor shrine in my home. Can I talk to them every day? And however, on Samhain, they get extra stuff and extra offerings, and and you know, it's a party for them. It's for them, you know. I think it's interesting because I present as a white person, but I'm part part Cherokee, and it's interesting. I'm very aware how I present and in cultures in cultural spaces. And I see a lot of white people who I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they just haven't been educated to say, no, just because you think something's cool doesn't mean you get to take it. However, I think kind of like what people do with you, Laura, I think it's okay when someone goes, hey, I'm German or Swiss or whatever. Can you help me come up with a practice that like your Day of the Dead, I don't want to appropriate. Can you help me come up with something on my own that's respectful? You know, and I think that's okay to do. And at the same time, if an indigenous person or a person of color says, I don't have the time, is not my responsibility, absolutely, thank you so much, whatever, you know, because I do believe in trying to educate people, but it isn't indigenous people's job to educate white people. It just isn't. However, I mean, I think it's okay to ask, but be prepared and can be thankful and be respectful. They say, I don't have the time, this and that, or whatever, you know.
Yeah. There, there are two things that I've seen lately, and I think they're fantastic. The first one is people who are educating people, like me, like others that do real education, like on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or whatever. They're throwing their Venmo out there, and they're asking people, if you appreciate what I'm sharing, you can send me a Venmo, you know? So, Blue Witch, Blue Witch a Venmo. But also people who are doing education like myself, I take so much pride on my culture and specifically Day of the Dead. I love to talk about it. I love, love, love to talk about it. And I will always be willing and able to help people. However, like you say, don't double down on me and tell me, but my Mexican friend says it's okay. Then if your Mexican friend says it's okay, why you ask me? You know, if you don't value my opinion, don't ask it. That about compensation. I want to say something before I forget about not having lineage or the ancestors and the deep spiritual work that you do. We were talking about photos, right? Well, what about the ancestors that didn't have photos?
Right.
What about the ancestors you never met? What about my great, great, great 20 times grandmother that was probably a witch or a curandera, or probably a very devout Catholic or Christian woman? Or what about my ancestor who was a lunatic person that howled at the moon and I never met him? Or what about the very uncomfortable uncle that was terrible? I'm not going to put labels in there. All of those spirits are with us. And I believe they come on Day of the Dead. So even if you don't have a non-lineage, if you just want to do an observance for spirits and the spirits that you don't know, if you were adopted because your parents were deceased or whatever, or you don't know, observe the season, not Day of the Dead specifically, but or whatever, if you're Mexican or Mexican American, but observe the season and commute with them.
Mm-hmm.
Feel their hands on your shoulders. I promise you, they're there.
Yeah, I think that's important. That, and the thing is, in this day and age, there's lots of books out there that are teaching people how to honor the ancestors. And if you're not a magical person per se, and you don't want to, because I go all out. I have a shrine, I got candles, I got my graveyard, sure, I got my offerings. If you don't want to do all that, simply light a candle and say a prayer to them, and actually talk to them. Like I say a prayer for them, and I talk to them. I think that the important thing about talking to the ancestors is talk to them just like I'm talking to you. And you may have a response or a feeling or something, and you may not, that's okay, because everyone's on has a different psychic gift. Maybe you see them, maybe you hear them, maybe you just feel them in your heart, whichever, it's fine. I really like what you said about the season is like a shift. It's a shift in consciousness. It's a shift in the energies. And the ancestors are here, they come, but the Day of the Dead is specifically a Mexican culture. But the season is for everyone. That's like saying, oh, solstice is only for Christians. Well, no, it's not. It's not. It's still solstice. However, well, I was going to say Christmas is specifically Christian, but they stole all the pagan stuff, so I can't say that. Speaking of appropriation.
But you know what? Let's not forget that indigenous traditions and Indo-European traditions, and all of the cultures in the world that celebrate the dead in this time of the year, celebrate and honor the dead in this time of the year, because what's happening on the earth, plain and simple, it's harvest time, earth goes to sleep, she goes to slumber, everything looks dead, though under the surface, everything's still bubbling with life. I love being a Mexican immigrant in Chicago because I get to see the seasons. In Mexico, where I come from, we don't see the seasons. And to see everything under ice, the lake is frozen. And then in 60 or 90 days, or in Chicago, it takes about 180, you'll have life again, you know? So remember that the dead I remember at harvest time because harvest time.
Right.
Not because one particular culture.
And funny with that, the one of the Chinese festivals I was referring to is actually in August, similar to how your indigenous was in August.
Yep.
But then the other is in, because they have two, the other is in April. And as I understand, even like the ancient Celts also had another time that they celebrated when the veil between us and the fae and the dead was thin again in the spring. And so there is going to be another opportunity, 6 months from now.
So you're
That's
telling me
right.
that I should celebrate Day of the Dead in April too?
Yes. But it won't be Day of the Dead.
Okay.
Because it was, as we've established, that's very specific. But
Yeah.
yes, we can welcome the spirits again in April.
Awesome.
It's interesting because in like old fairy lore and witch lore from the Middle Ages, they talk about how at Samhain and at Beltane, exactly what you're just saying, the other world opens and here comes the dead, here come the fae, here come elves, here come goblins, here come trolls, here come witches. It's all there. And I remember getting confused because I was like, well, I thought that spring is about fairies and fall is about the dead. And yes, it can be whatever, but it doesn't have to be, So, going back about for what you guys just said, the Romans also had a Day of the Dead and at the end of April. It was called what was it called? Like, oh, I forget. I want to say it's Laura. And there's a Latin term that means ancestral ghost or ancestral spirit. Laure, maybe it's Laure, maybe? I don't know. I forget. But anyway, what closing remarks to, oh my God, show's over. Can you believe that crap? Dang it. What the hell? Do you have any closing remarks, statements?
I'm gonna make you do what I make do all my apprentices when we have a Day of the Dead talk or workshop. So this is practical, okay? I want you to please touch your forehead and then touch your eye sockets, occipital bone is called, and tug the cartilage on your nose and touch your cheekbones, and if you're Mexican, go to town, and touch your lower jaw and feel your teeth, and then your upper jaw and feel your teeth. And now go towards your ears and feel the bones that connect with your jaw when you do So that's called that skeleton, that cranium that is inside of you, right? That's death. Death don't come for us. Death is with us the whole time. Because what are we under the skin if not skulls with never-ending smiles?
Never-ending smiles. I love it. I love it. All right. Freighter, Aaron, did you have any last things to say or comment?
Keep dying.
Did you say keep dying? You know how they say, like, there's two things that and I always like to hear or say is when someone says, you know, in the future, we're going to be someone else's ancestor, which I think is cool. The other thing is right now, you're the youngest you will ever be. Right at this moment, you are the youngest you will ever be. So like this whole journey into like aging and dying and death and yeah, reincarnation, blah, blah, blah. But who we are today, who we are now at this time in 2022, at this very moment we can never have again, you know? So just things to think about as we celebrate the time of decline and death. I was like, but that doesn't sound cheery, but I think it's cheery. I think it's very wholesome, but whatever. All right. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Laura. I very much am honored that Laura is a part of our show. She brings a fresh perspective that I haven't. And so funny, we agree with each other all the time, but on the things when she has a different opinion, I'm like, yeah, that's good. Yeah, keep going. That's awesome. So I want to personally say thank you for not only being our guest, but also being our host. So on that, everyone have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.